Welcome to the Agile Localization Podcast by Crowdin, where we unpack the strategies and solutions that make localization fast, scalable, and efficient. I'm your host, Stefan Huyghe. Good morning from Texas and good afternoon in Germany. We are here with the Agile Localization Podcast by Crowdin, and today we're interviewing a very special guest from Loquatics, Daniel Finck. And we're going to be talking about the in-house playbook for implementing scalable localization workflows to your CI/CD project. It's going to be an engineering session, so get ready to geek out. In this episode, we sit down with Daniel Finck, a localization engineer who learned his trade in the pressure cooker of free-to-play game development. Daniel, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience a little bit and give us a bit more background. It's better that you do it because I will likely forget something for sure. So go ahead.
So just real quick about myself. I grew up in the free-to-play world where there was a lot of opportunity for people like me to kind of create your own localization workflow, or this new setup that hasn't been done yet, because continuous localization was not yet a thing. And there was a lot of expectations from the stakeholders who wanted to get their projects done. And for me, the best way to kind of make everybody aware that there is dependencies between the decisions they're making in terms of due dates and in terms of the expected quality was to have like some transparent reporting. So one of the key pillars, or the first one that I would like to point out, is managing expectations of all these stakeholders, to kind of get everybody a clear picture of, if we do this, for example, if we do something quicker, then something else will fall short. It's just the logic of things, right? Everybody is clear about this, and project managers and product owners know about this. They know about this dependency when talking with IT, for example, which needs to set up their servers. And if there's like a high priority project, then of course the others will have to wait. This is like the difference of working internally, where you are on board with your own client, so to speak, and part of the same entity, versus kind of being external and just chipping in and providing your best practices approach, right?
I think a lot of people don't realize how many layers there are to a continuous localization project. And I think you're highlighting the complexity of it very well.
And who knows least about localization and like the continuous localization and the difficulties are probably the people that are actually giving you these tasks. Because imagine that if you are a product manager for games and you have like all these different things that you need to take care of, localization is like one aspect of it. It's involving a lot of people, but it's also not the most expensive one, so this puts it in the tier or the hierarchy of things a little bit lower than, let's say, marketing, for example, which costs a lot. So the product manager has to deal with budget, of course, and servers and like setting up things and getting the user acquisition, everything ready. That costs a lot of money. So that's kind of like higher tiered. So there's like maybe an attention span that you want to commit to all of these subtasks, localization being one of them. So I, as like an internal service provider for this particular aspect of his game or her game, want to make sure that localization is not a big to-do that involves a lot of manual interaction, Basically, what a stakeholder wants internally would be kind of like a green light or traffic light system. If everything is green, then I trust you as the localization expert to make my game the best, or give it the best localization, whatever that means. You decide. You are like kind of our localization speaksperson or spokesperson. So that's why I think like if you lay it out transparently for everybody, then it creates the least amount of friction surface, So I think that's what everybody should go for first when handling it internally.
Getting everybody on board is an important part.
Yes. And you know what? Like you can even companies that are driven by metrics, like these free-to-play companies, or maybe less to today, but back in the day, definitely everything was about numbers. You can put localization into KPI numbers if you want to. It's not as it's not as like accurate maybe as sales numbers are. But of course, you can make like some kind of parallel between the outcome, like the quality of localization, and then the sales numbers, and then compare it maybe.
There's a lot of talk nowadays about outcome-based localization, and that's maybe an interesting area to explore with you for a minute. Do you have any examples of?
It's all about return of investment, right? Like, so let's say a stakeholder gives me, again, back to the iron triangle, right? Like, gives me X amount of time to complete a task. And then I make the argument for, well, if we actually spend a week longer, we can probably do a better job. It is a very short notice. And then the stakeholder, of course, needs to make a decision. Well, that means 1 week later. What does it mean for my sales? What does it mean for whatever, all the dependencies that are involved? Tell me, Daniel, what makes this week better? Can you kind of quantify it? So this is like where you'll have like these things come into play. If you can actually present some metrics, that are based on something, on previous data, and can kind of give an estimate on the outcome, the expected outcome, then actually you are sitting on the same table as like the other people from the other very businessy departments, at this desk.
Yeah, I think for people that come from the localization side, the provider side, like you and I, we don't often have a very good grasp on what a content management workflow looks like on the company side. And maybe it sounds like you have a lot of experience with that. Are there any particular challenges you've uncovered and ways to make that easier, to give us some more transparency on workflow?
Yeah, there's definitely some common things that I'm kind of witnessing again and again when it comes to content management. Often, many departments were kind of siloed in. Like, let's say, for example, you have a design department that is coming up with Figma designs, right? Like where they're creating all the UI for whatever website or your application. Then this is completed, and then it goes to the IT department, where the IT department will then deal with the implementation. And then somewhere in between, localization happens. And in most cases, because all of these departments working in their own instances, for example, Figma, GitHub, and then the localization tool or environment, if there is any, there is like a disconnect of where this content is going and from which position or from where it should actually originate. Does the stakeholder kind of monitor its process through this pipeline, or does the IT department or the designer, nobody really feels like kind of responsible for it? So this is where I feel there's a great opportunity for localization to swoop in and kind of bring order to these things. Because since there is no common tool that is kind of unifying it, why not making it your CAT tool, actually, as like a central pillar of this whole channel, where you can finally have like all these departments come together and everybody has like a benefit of it, and nobody having to deal with exports or like with files that actually are just a medium to get stuff from one department to another. One of the best examples for that, everybody knows this, is the Excel export of content. Like, who doesn't receive or who hasn't received like an export of some database, and then you're kind of like tasked with translating it. It's not because it actually looks like this in the native environment because it's a database. Of course it doesn't. They just exported it for you because like you as a localization person, of course, cannot read the database. So they give you an export, which is unfortunate because what we do in localization is importing it to our tool and it becomes, again, a database. So that's kind of a bummer. Why not skipping this whole like exporting thing in the first place?
It almost sounds like you're advocating for localization to become an internal service provider of sorts.
Definitely, you kind of advertise yourself as it. Like you want to kind of tease your colleagues with some advantage they have, like with all this professional setups that you're kind of presenting them with. So you don't want to become the second or the next IT department, though. You know how it works, right? Like you write a Jira ticket and then you wait and then hopefully it will be done, and you better be nice to the IT person so you get your stuff done. Of course, if as a limited resource, localization works kind of similarly. People need to kind of submit their request, but I feel because it's also a younger department, I think there is some opportunity for making it a little bit more flexible and a little bit more welcoming. So first of all, for example, you kind of need to make sure that that all the localization in a company is running through you in the first place. This is not something that you can just expect, because marketing will also have like their people that are speaking whatever language, and it's just real quick to like have them translate stuff. I speak German. Why can I not just do the German banner for whatever? And then stuff goes wrong, or like maybe the game, like essential aspects of your application or your game or whatever is changing, and marketing doesn't know, and all of a sudden you have an inconsistency. That happens even to the big companies nowadays. You can see this where there's a big disconnect between what's out there in terms of marketing and then actually what the game is looking like, right? So to really get everybody on board, of course, you can make things very mandatory and like forceful and like get on everybody's whatever to like if something goes wrong. But instead, I feel the easier or the better way to do it is to have like a hub that is more convenient to use when it comes to translation requests, for example, than going to Google Translate. So it needs to be as performative as that. If it's too much of a hassle, people will just like do it on their own. If it's as easy as like, let's say, a text box where people can just put their stuff, while of course submitting it to a form that also already kind of identifies them by department and team and whatever. It's all that information that comes with it that you can already kind of interpret for yourself as localization entity. Then that's fine, So what I feel that worked out great was to kind of have like an internal hub of some kind, whether this is on like some intranet page or some existing environment. I had Jira, for example, in the past, where we had a very customized template that we worked on, or Confluence, for example, or any of the new tools with Monday and ClickUp. These are all presenting great platforms for that.
Game localization, of course, is all about agile development and continuous localization or integration. That's where Crowdin comes in a little bit as well. I figure, how well does localization fit in the agile development workflow, and what tech setups you come with to maintain it agile regardless? Because at the outset, I think we're already in agreement that it's not. A lot of localization workflows are not very agile, so you really need a system to conform to it.
Well, traditionally, translation at its core is like one of the core components of localization is not an agile process. You have a translator, and he's translating as a single individual through from A to B a text. There is nothing agile about this. And it can't be, because what Agile would expect is kind of having discussions about like individual string translations or whatever. That doesn't work like that. But however, there's of course like ways where you can portion things off, like where you can kind of put it into smaller portions that then can be managed agilely, whatever, like in an agile way, right? You know what I mean? Like, so with a tool that allows you to kind of automatically do certain things, you can segment things in, for example, pre-translated or something that has been automatically done by some process. So that becomes like a subtask that you can then, in an agile way, discuss, manage, process, and assign. And so by nature, localization is kind of not like a perfect fit for agile, but if with the right tools, and tools is kind of like the keyword here, then this becomes a possibility. Tool is important also for this, what I mentioned before, when you are like an entity that's called localization, and you have to deal with other departments. How do you express or how do you quantify your work? So you cannot do this by like just pointing at a Google Sheet or like an Excel file. Nobody knows if you have like an Excel file with 60,000 rows what this means in terms of work. Where is the localization happening? The translator themselves don't know. Like I worked on back in the day on documents, they were just delimited by tabs, and it was just one big text file, and nobody had any visibility on whether this was done before or duplicates or whatever. So this is where tools come in that hone in and like kind of quantify the actual work and kind of professionalize you as an entity internally towards the others here as well.
What specific workflows do you employ in Crowdin in order to make your life easier in that regard?
There is, of course, a lot of like integration or like a lot of features that are geared towards task management that Crowdin already has. I feel, for me personally, that I always more latched onto it rather than using it directly. The great thing is that Crowdin is completely open for not using that task management system and just like using your own, which is an important fact because like I have encountered a lot of tools that are not as like compatible with your own workflows. So while it's great that it's there, I much rather prefer to use my project management tool, let's say Jira or ClickUp or whatever, having my own customized, way more detailed workflow in this, and then having it live though. You know, I don't want to have like project managers going between Crowdin and the task management system back and forth and copy paste certain statuses that should be automatically updated. And that's the thing, like you can have Crowdin to send statuses towards your PMS tool, right? There's like a webhook, very basic webhook feature that everybody can use. It's really easy. So even if there might not be an integration in the marketplace available for your specific tool, you can make it work with anything using that webhook thing, you know, like where you can have a status being submitted when a translator finishes a certain area or a certain range of tags even in your translation project. And then this flags a status in your PMS tool, which could then lead to certain estimations on when something will be done, which could then lead to your stakeholder reporting templates, leading to the hopefully green light. If you want it, if you want to have it like as agile or as fluent and automatically synced, then this gives you the opportunity to do so.
It sounds like you have a very structured approach at Loquatics. Since you're talking about pillars and structured approaches, how do you establish a target language authority? Who gets to decide? We've all been in projects where things get debated internally and it's not super clear who is the final authority. How do you deal with that challenge?
Totally. Like, who doesn't know like the situation where let's say you're localization, you're the head of localization, and the product manager comes back to you and says, well, this looks like players have reported this looks terrible and whatever. What did you do? And tell me who the name of the translator is, and we will deal with it, so to speak, right? Maybe not as harsh, but it actually then maybe is a language that you don't speak. Polynesian, I don't know, like something that is definitely not in your wheelhouse. So you need to find ways to prepare for this. I'm of the opinion that actually as a log manager, your best qualification is not speaking a lot of languages. It's actually not that relevant because you will never be able to speak all the languages. And even if you would you ever argue with somebody who's really a native speaker about like their language? I would have trouble doing this. So maybe the better strategy here is to find ways to still make it possible to monitor and to question things. The obvious thing, of course, being, well, you probably have like somebody else to reference or to cross-check, right? This is something, this is what I mean with like establishing language authority, is to still have the ability to say, nope, that looks like crap before it goes out to the stakeholder. Whether this is towards the vendor, saying like the incoming translations look terrible, like please redo, and I don't really want to submit it to the stakeholder, which kind of makes you look kind of bad if you're just like handing things through, you know, like, okay, here, this is what the vendor gave us, and then the product manager comes back, oh, this is terrible, and you give it back to the vendor. I think you as a localization person in-house should be already like kind of looking for certain things, for key identifiers of problems and issues, even without speaking that language.
It sounds like you're a very technical guy as well, Daniel, and picking the right tech stack for a project or a series of projects is super important. How do you go about consulting with your clients in that regard?
In regards to like this also gets me back maybe a little bit to the how do you check things maybe if you don't have your own in-house team, right, where you can just like run a translation or where you can just like have them have a look at it, say what the vendor delivers. There are other ways, of course, to check internal structure of a text, whether this is consistency, like where the terms that are used in a translation have to be consistent with your term base, or whether this is just like general way of using, well, the typical translation pairs that you find for whatever language. So when I look for tech, it kind of allows me to do this without asking me to subscribe to like some extra service. I feel like many providers are like are kind of mushing in or like meshing localization services with their tool aspects. Maybe this is not as big of a thing as it was like maybe a couple of years ago, where you had this a lot and it was difficult to really get your own kind of independent language resources plus then a tool disconnected from another. So this is how I actually arrived at Crowdin, because like they presented themselves as this open tool, which was also easy to configure and customize without asking for subscription or without like putting me on the spot when it comes to first having a meeting and like first having a sales call, which puts you in a terrible place as a middle manager internally, because you also like need to kind of argue about like what your department needs and in terms of tooling and stuff. So to have like somebody there or like a service provider who's just open for being like maybe a template or like maybe a kind of unbranded tool that can be embedded into something else is invaluable. So that this would be like one of my first criteria. Is this tool actually suitable for the corporate setup? No matter whether it is a great localization tool, that's the first thing. If nobody is using it, or if the IT department says, no, we cannot use it, then it doesn't matter how good this tool is. You will have a hard time to make an argument for it. That's kind of attitude of a software, so to speak, to not impose themselves onto their users is very crucial for me.
Yeah, you want to make it as easy as possible to integrate. What are the challenges that arise in incorporating localization in an agile development cycle, in your opinion? What are the main ones that we should be looking out for?
One of the biggest one, like as everybody knows, like you as localization entity, you want to get as close and as tight as you can to the actual source or the root channel or root branch, so to speak, because everything that is happening in between is kind of like a black box. Are people exporting a file again? Is it then edited by some other entity? Will we then have the most recent files? Is the developer putting all of our changes into the live version, or are they outdated? Who doesn't know like the bugs, the obvious bugs that you find in games where everybody is like asking, how did localization submit this? Well, the issue is that they didn't, or they already fixed it, but then it didn't go live yet. You know, that's unfortunate, of course. So you want to get rid of all of these like interim kind of steps. However, the devs, of course, don't really want anybody to interfere with their precious code, you know, with their source. So rightfully so, of course, they should make sure. So there needs to be a common ground where you can still, if you cannot get like to GitHub directly or to the master branch, then there should be some other way that doesn't require manual steps in between. And some of the setups that I did were very much dealing with this particular aspect primarily, because like there have been maybe usually like when I nowadays getting on a project, stuff went wrong with the original setup, so they're now looking for some improvement. So this first requires me to go in and to kind of sift out what went wrong or why do we have certain processes. It often turns out that there are a lot of stuff, or there are a lot of conversion processes going on that are not really required. And why are they there? Because somebody maybe thought translators would need this. So whenever that happens, that is already a red flag. You know, whenever there was like some thinking of what localization needs, then creating maybe a tool or some other thing that is getting stuff out of this perfectly fine environment, which is GitHub, into an Excel sheet. And then you have this disaster, because piggybacking on this is maybe a process that you will then have a hard time to get out of, or then have to hire a consultant to kind of make sense of it. Because if this is a project running for years, and some of these mobile games we're having are running for decades now, then people have exchanged or like have switched out, and nobody knows how it's working and nobody's touching it. So you kind of need to make sure to log into it and see where certain issues are coming from, and getting as close as possible to the source is like the way to go.
Avoiding the Excel spreadsheet scenario, export scenario is something that Crowdin can help with for sure. What features facilitate seamless integration into agile localization workflows in Crowdin as well, in your opinion?
Well, I think it would be the best feature would be that it is actually kind of presenting itself as this common ground for all the departments. Like, let's say for Figma specifically, when we go back to the setup of designers, engineers or developers and localization people, then Crowdin, for example, can present its common interface by providing a Figma integration right out of the box, right? That is working great. And with that, you can go to your designer and say, hey, listen, instead of like having to fiddle around with your Figma formats and localization, or having to wait until the translator is providing some content so you can then actually do your design with it, see if everything is working out in terms of space, we actually have a direct integration with your tool that gives you not some mock-up translation text, but the accurate translation for you to kind of design around, you know? And then localization has the advantage of being able to actually right away with this design happening to kind of validate it, you know, like in terms of, is it positioned right? Is it not taking too much space? Or is it maybe out of context now that you're seeing it in the design, right? And the whole thing doesn't really require IT at all yet. So whereas back in the day, but like in some startups, even today, it requires the developers to kind of create keys so localization can then create translations. So then the designs can happen. It's like the wrong way around. Developers usually are the rarest resource that you're having internally. They're also the one with the biggest price tag. So they're kind of their own precious thing. So you want to save them. And so in this process that I mapped out, you leave them for the last portion. They only come in once everybody is done with it, you know? And then it's ready for life in a sense, because they already checked it. They can deal with the implementation. That's where we go. And they can connect, whereas the Figma, the design is connected with the Figma integration, for example, the developers connect with the GitHub integrations that existing, or your own custom one. This is what I'm saying. Like, while there are a lot of marketplace integrations happening on Crowdin, you're not bound to them by any means. Like, you can just write your own. And I did in the past, because like I felt maybe in some regards, like security was an issue. I wasn't able to get in as closely as possible, so I had to have like a mediator that is working internally, that we could have like a security buffer. Then you can do this.
It's easy to get carried away on OpenAI nowadays. We're almost at the end already, Daniel. I have one parting question. Maybe you, as a super user of Crowdin, what's your favorite feature in Crowdin that you really think makes it special to be able to work in a Crowdin environment?
There are ways that Crowdin allows me to integrate with my own file locations that I'm having. I'm using a lot of like automation tools that me as a non-engineer can still use by just like latching on certain APIs and connecting the dots, so to speak, in between. But what really, for me in the past, to be honest, and we're talking about like, I don't know, like almost 20 years that I've worked with this software, is probably the team. I really love the support. It's very different, I feel, than dealing with a lot of the other tech tools supports I had in the past. Or maybe it was just because like I was there from very early on. They're very immediate in terms of like their responses here, and also they are more tech oriented. So when I talk with them, that I know that they are actually coming from the position of having to deal with localization rather than having to also sell it and then ask their own tech department for not as immediate as I would like. So that's probably one of the, in my setups, I have to kind of sell other tools as part of my overall solution to solve a certain issue. And for me, it is very important that when I hand it over to my client, that I make sure that it doesn't collapse as soon as I'm out of the door. It needs to work. And so I need to rely on the support of the teams that are of the software that I'm kind of promoting with it, or like that I'm handing over, is also ready to do so, and that's not like unreliable, whatever. So they need to kind of be ready for the situation of being part of another solution. And I feel that the flexibility is just there and with Crowdin.
Well, it's great to hear. And it probably will not surprise you that this is something I hear all the time. I go to conferences and I talk with people in person about Crowdin, and the tech supports aspect is mentioned often. So it's good to hear that you feel the same way. Daniel, thank you so very much sharing your localization insights this morning or this afternoon with us here at the Agile Localization Podcast by Crowdin. We've already exhausted a half an hour just like that. We could probably go on for another hour. Thank you so very much. We'll have to do it again soon and maybe do a second wing of this. Have a wonderful day in Berlin, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Anytime, Stefan.
Well, folks, that's a wrap on today's episode of the Agile Localization Podcast by Crowdin. We hope you found it as insightful as we did. If you enjoyed today's conversation and want to learn more about how leading companies are managing their multilingual content efficiently, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming episodes. Thank you for tuning in. For more resources on how to streamline your localization process, visit crowdin.com. See you next time.